Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. It feels like we're going through a weather whiplash, from droughts to floods in a very short period of time. So what's going on? And more importantly, what does it mean for the Valley generally and the ag-based economy in particular? Our guest is Lois Henry. She's the CEO and editor of SJV Water, a nonprofit independent online news publication dedicated to covering water issues in the San Joaquin Valley. And I must say, if you want to stay informed with Valley water issues, there might be no better source. So I encourage folks to check out their website. Well, welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
So prior to this year, California generally and the Valley in particular was experiencing some severe drought situations. Can you give us the historical context of how bad the drought was, and can you quantify it for us?
It was so that's 2020 through 2023, or the summer of 2023. So it was a 3-year drought. It was epically dry, as they say. I don't know if it was as bad as it was in 2015. We have had back-to-back severe droughts, but it's interesting. Everybody's talking about weather whiplash and how sort of shocking us modern folks find this. But if you look up John Austin's book, Tulare Basin Flood and Drought, this is how it works in California. So, we're now looking at, what we're seeing based on records we've kept for 100 years. Well, 100 years is a blip of time. So I've been preaching for years that we need to operate as if we are always in a drought. I actually don't like the word drought because this is just California. And then we get these incredibly flush years occasionally. And we like to think, oh, but that should be normal because that's easier for us humans to have a lot of water and have it be really, plentiful and available. But Mother Nature has very different ideas about how things should work in California. And I think we should really probably work under that paradigm rather than the paradigm that's more beneficial to us. So the drought was horrible. It was terrible. The dry period, I should say. And it was exacerbated because the previous dry period, had cut back on water, and farmers had to pump so much. And then, we had the 2 decent years, 17 and 19, and then boom, right back into a dry period.
Yeah, up and down. In fact, I was looking up some statistics, and I was saying from the last 3 years, 2020 to 2022, was the driest 3-year period on record. And that preceded the record drought from 2013 to 2015. So it's been pretty bad. In fact, in 2021, the summer of 2021, 95% of California was in severe drought status. So it was pretty bad. So then we've seen this kind of reversal now, all this rain. People are very happy about that, all the snowpack. Can you put this recent situation in historical context?
Again, remember, historic records and historic context is 100 years. So really a blip when it comes to the overall look at how California and everything operates. But from our record keeping, I think that the overall snowpack, and that goes kind of from Shasta down to Kern County, that's like at 300% above of normal. And then the southern San Joaquin Valley, the mountains in the southern San Joaquin Valley are at more than 400% of normal. And those numbers don't just mean, that the snowpack is huge and high, which it is. It also means the water content and the anticipated runoff between April and July is expected to be in the South Valley, 429% above normal. And then you can look at each watershed as well. So it is epic. It's a record for, our habitation.
So, people would say, okay, this is historic, but you're saying not really, this has happened before. Is climate change playing any role here, making it worse than it's been in the past?
That's what scientists are saying, that we're getting more wet storms. And that's not necessarily great for California, because the way we set up our water supply system was that we rely on the Sierra Nevadas as our freezer. It holds on to our water. And then we've built this reservoir and canal system so that it dribbles out into those reservoirs, and then we convey it through the canals into our cities and our farms. And that's not what's necessarily going to be happening in the future. We're going to get some of these, a lot more of these big wet storms. So it doesn't, there's no freezer effect anymore. So, and we did see that March 10th, and that was the start of our massive flooding in the San Joaquin Valley. Of course, Northern California experienced flooding in January, and then it was March 10th. This, what they call an atmospheric river, Pineapple Express, whatever you want to call it, very large, very wet, drenching, warm storm. And we had an accumulation of snow at lower elevations prior to that, sort of a historic, cold snows at lower elevations. So this warm storm came in, brought a lot of moisture, and washed down all that low snow. So that's why you saw some just crazy flooding, because these ephemeral streams, like streams you've never heard about before, Pozo Creek,
right.
Deer, White Creek, they just popped up. They don't have headwaters in the Sierras. They're just there in the foothills, and they just raged, just absolutely.
Yeah, and that brings us to the conversation of the reemergence of Tulare Lake, which we're going to talk about in the next segment. That's going to be an interesting conversation. Is Mother Nature taking over? That conversation in a moment. This is Mark Keppler with the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. Well, it appears that Tulare Lake may be reemerging. That means that the Corcoran levee's got to be raised again. And why does it have to be raised again, you may ask? Well, that's because it's sunk 4 feet in the last 6 years. That's a result of a lot of groundwater pumping, a lot by farmers in and around Corcoran, and it's taking the levee with it. The land is sinking, and it's taking the levee with it. And that levee basically protects Corcoran from this snowfelt-infused and reemerged Tulare Lake. We're talking with Lois Henry. She's with SJV Water. So what about this reemergence of Tulare Lake in the valley? What does it mean for local communities like Corcoran, Allensworth, Stratford, just to name a few?
Well, it's interesting, because I know that there's a lot of folks that are kind of cheering on the reemergence of Tulare Lake, and it's if you go out there, it's amazing and it's vast and it's sort of awe-inspiring how it looks. But it's also it's not really a great thing for the communities. First of all, there's flooding risks, but also when the land is covered with water, it can't be farmed and people can't work, and that is the industry there. I mean, if people don't like that and they think that it should be a lake, well, maybe the state should purchase some of that land and create a floodplain and make it a lake again. But for the time being, it is income producing, it is job producing, and it is underwater. So it's not that great, and it's certainly not pretty. It's very industrial. There's a lot of manure from dairies out there. Do not get in that water. It is not for weight. It's dangerous. It's nasty and dangerous.
So the levees have been sinking around Corcoran subsidence for a while. What's causing it, and who's going to pay for raising the levees?
Okay, so we talked about the drought in the last segment, and I talked a little bit about farmers going more to groundwater pumping, and that is what is causing the subsidence. Hands down, there's no question that it's excessive groundwater pumping in the area or in and around Corcoran to a massive degree. When I started doing stories in 2020 about that area, I mean, Corcoran has sunk 11 feet, over the last 10 or so years. And because the whole area is sinking, I mean, you could see it from space. Jay Famiglietti with the Jet Propulsion Lab calls it the Corcoran Bowl. That's
amazing, Lois. That's amazing. 11 feet. Think about that. 11 feet. So all the infrastructure, roads, levees, whatever, it's all sinking 11 feet. That's quite a bit.
Right. That's enough to swallow up a 2-story house if you think about it that way. So and it's continuing to sink. And, everybody sort of is looking at the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is going to be fixing this. Well, that doesn't kick in until 2040. And when I looked up the groundwater plans that have been put out there, there is one from the El Rico Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and El Rico is Boswell. It's, the J.G. Boswell company.
J.G. Boswell is a major ag producer in that area, owns a lot of the land in the original, Tulare Lake Basin. So they had a plan to deal with groundwater sustainability, and what happened there?
Well, the plan was to allow Corcoran to sink 11 more feet. And then when I started really digging into this groundwater sustainability plan, it's interesting because, most of these plans that are being put out by these agricultural water districts have steps like, oh, we're going to reduce our pumping this much this year and then this much this year. And we're going to try and bring in more water and we're going to retire some land, et cetera. In that El Rico GSA, it had no management actions until 2035, when magically the aquifer would sort of rebound. So it was very clear that they were not going to be doing anything to change the situation.
And just to be clear, groundwater sustainability has to occur by 2040. So they're waiting until the last 5 years before that. Okay.
Right. And I think the two main reasons that the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed in 2014, one of them was subsidence, clearly, because so many of our areas are subsiding, the land sinking beneath canals and roads and bridges. I mean, it's damaging our infrastructure. The Bryant-Kern Canal right now is having to be rebuilt because it cannot carry enough water because a portion of it has sunk.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, though, taxpayers are paying for the levees around Corcoran, essentially, at least fronting up the money, and also rebuilding the canal that's also sunk as a result of subsides. I'm going to ask you real quick. We've only got about 30 seconds left, but what about the federal state government paying like J.G. Boswell, other farmers to take their land out of production and then using that as a way to, flood the fields and recharge the groundwater? Has that been tried, or is that being talked about?
That has not been talked about or tried as far as I know. There are individual agricultural water districts that are buying some land from their farmers and then fallowing it or using it for recharge, et cetera. But it's on a very, very small scale. And we're talking about just a grand scale here.
Okay, so up next, we're going to talk about what the state is actually doing to deal with this flooding. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Lois Henry with SJV Water, a nonprofit independent online news publication dedicated to covering water issues in the San Joaquin Valley. Again, I would encourage you to look them up if you want to be current on water issues. So let me ask you this. You often hear that the word crisis really can be divided into two words. One danger and the other opportunity. And we all know that there's a current danger with possible flooding that's been discussed. But is this also an opportunity to recharge our depleted groundwater? Is that happening?
Yes, in some places. In Kern County, there's just this bar none has the most groundwater recharge of probably any place in the valley and in the state, probably in the world. They've been building recharge in Kern County like nobody's business. So they only recently had to spill the Kern River out into the aqueduct because it just got to be so big. But they've been taking almost all of the Kern River, which is flowing at epic proportions. Kings County, Tulare County, Fresno County, not nearly as much recharge. They just haven't put as much emphasis on it over the years. And the Kings River is already flowing with the San Joaquin River. It goes north and it goes up to the San Joaquin Delta and out to the bay. So that's already been happening. And I was just talking to a very large water district that changed out its whole board of directors because they wanted to do more recharge. And I was like, great. So how's the recharge going? And they were like, well, 6,500 acre feet. And I'm like, what?
I'm going to guess it begins with a W, but I'm not going to say it.
Well, I haven't written the story yet, Mark. So
okay, so we'll leave that alone. But let me ask you this. It's kind of interesting. I was reading that the Kern Water Bank has 1.5 million acre feet of water underground. And people don't realize how much is available instead of necessarily building a dam. If you look at places like Pine Flat and Militant up here in Fresno, the reality is there's more available space, I guess, in the Kern or capacity in the Kern Water Bank than there is in Pine Flat and Militant combined. So,
and there are other opportunities as well. The Pleasant Valley, which is sort of at the southern end of Westlands and up into the foothills there, just to the west, they claim that they have another 1 million acre feet that they could store underground as well. The problem is getting the water there and getting
right. Will it percolate down there? And that's one of the things I want to ask you about in terms of contamination. So we have all this flood water, and even if you say you flood fields or you use it to recharge the aquifer, there's still a lot of contaminants in that water, just fertilizer and other things, legacy chemicals,
solvents, grease, oil. Yeah.
What about that? Is the state doing anything to address that issue to make sure that the people still have access to clean drinking water?
Well, we did a story just recently, SJV Water did, on that issue, and whether there was going to be any long-term effects. And the experts we talked to, I mean, this is fairly encouraging in all the world of discouraging water news we have. They said, look, if it doesn't get into a wellhead, it will percolate through the soil, and the soil has a natural cleaning, tendency. It will take out the nasty stuff.
Yes, I remember the quote in that article. I think the quote in the article was, "Dilution is the solution."
To pollution, yes.
Pollution, yes. I feel it. Yes, finish that. So they're thinking that may really rectify the situation.
Well, it depends on which situation you're talking about.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it will kind of, the more water that you have coming through, as long as you have enough, it will dilute salts and nitrates and everything. As long as you're in an area of good percolation. Now we have areas of perched water because we have Corcoran clay. That's where the term Corcoran comes from, and that is impermeable. And if you're there, then you have more of a problem.
Is that kind of the famous hard pan that we've all in our backyards, and we hit that? It's like, man, it's like concrete trying to get through that.
And it is, yeah.
Okay. Well, up next, we're going to talk about the local government response to dealing with the threat of flooding. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Lois Henry with SJV Water about the government's response to the threat of flooding due to the record snowpack we're experiencing. So what, if anything, are local governments, like counties, doing to address this possible flooding issue?
Oh boy. How do I do this without swearing? Okay. So one of the big problems in this San Joaquin Valley, in the South San Joaquin Valley in particular, is that there is no overarching flood agency. It's a hodgepodge of, the county might do something here, a city might do something there. The boundaries don't actually meet up. So maybe a water district is in between. There is a levee district over there, but it really doesn't have responsibility for this, that, or the other. There's the Army Corps of Engineers, which runs most of the lakes, but they pretty much abdicate their responsibility when it comes downstream. So you've just got these layers upon layers upon layers to try and, as a reporter or as a citizen, to try and figure out, like, okay, what's going on? What's heading my way? How do I work at this? What do I do? And we've got the situation now, and it permeates almost all government, and it's gotten worse through the pandemic of, email me your questions and I might get back to you. Oh, go through my PIO. And the PIO doesn't know crap because they're a PIO. They're not an expert in, levees strength and, what's happening with the water, et cetera, et cetera. So they have to go back to somebody else and they go with written questions. And then it's just, it's absurd and it's ridiculous. And it's a huge public safety issue that I have been just screaming about to, especially the city of Bakersfield and the county of Kern, and the Army Corps of Engineers. They have not been forthcoming with information. And I've, because I've worked in water for so long, there's a lot of engineers and mechanical engineers that I deal with all the time. And most of these guys a lot of them are retired now. And they're taking the time now to look at the numbers, the dam height, spillway height, channel capacities, levee capacities, who's in charge of what. And they're putting together spreadsheets and they're like, the Army Corps of Engineers or the county of Kern may want to say everything's just fine, but if the melt comes down at this level and this speed and the reservoir,
that all depends. That all depends. If we have, it all depends what kind of weather we have. El Nino. If we're going to have some hot summer, then it could. I mean, some people are saying that maybe not all. They're hoping that not all the snow will melt, but that's kind of being optimistic. I do want to ask you, is there any coordination going on? You said you're talking about all these different agencies that are overlapping. Are they talking to each other, or is there? It would
just
seem
recently the Department of Water Resources kind of stepped in and started trying to have meetings, with all the appropriate agencies in each county, and they've been trying to put together, like an atlas for the county to try and sort of give everybody the same information to work with. But when they came into Kern County, the Kern County folks went, "We don't like your maps. They're stupid. We're going to make our own maps." So, I don't know how well this is all working together. They will tell you that
I did want to ask you about something. I was reading, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a valley flood plan, and neither Kings, Tulare, Fresno, or Kern counties are part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. There's the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, and I believe it was created through legislation in like 2004. And then, sort of over the time, it became implemented, and people can.
Well, why is that? Why aren't they participating?
That's a good question. I have asked so many different places, because that's where you get the state funding, to do the big projects like build floodplains, build levees, et cetera, come up with like sort of a joint memo of operating agreement,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. Which
Yeah,
all takes money.
coordination. It seems logical response.
Right. So there's two different theories that I've heard. That the state didn't want the Southern Valley because they're sort of starting in a small, effort and moving forward. And then I've also heard that the South Valley folks didn't want to be a part of it because they didn't want state control. And I can totally believe that. I don't have any evidence to say that's true, but I can totally believe that.
Well, let me ask you, we've only got about a minute left, but I did want to follow up on your point about transparency and being forthcoming. We see that a lot. It's not just in this area. Politicians won't show up unless it's a very friendly audience or friendly media outlet. That's problematic from a policy standpoint, isn't it?
It's problematic from every standpoint. If you are, and I don't just mean somebody who's elected, but a department head, and you're telling me that you have control over public money and public safety, you should be able to answer some questions. And more and more politicians, department heads, bureaucrats don't think that they have to answer questions. And that's a huge problem. And, you can see that this has gotten worse and worse as journalism has sort of imploded over the years. So that is one of my huge pet peeves. And I'm constantly on people about it. It's like, no, you should answer questions. No, I'm not going to, this is not an essay question. I don't want your stupid, email back and forth, get on the phone and talk to me.
And the email's done by the PO. So it's all this wordsmithing with a lot of issues and vague answers, and doesn't really answer the question. That is a very important point. We'll leave it there, but we should demand that from our electeds and from our bureaucrats. We should demand straight answers. I want to thank Lois Henry with SJV Water for joining us today. If you want to see current local and state politics, you can read the Maddy Daily, our free e-newsletter, by just logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.